The back bell at Rourke & Sons rang at 2 in the morning, and nobody who rings that bell at that hour is bringing paperwork. Callie Rourke came down the corridor in her rubber apron with her gloves still wet. Through the frosted glass of the delivery door, she counted 4 upright shapes and 1 long, low shape carried between them. She turned the lock anyway because that was what her family had done for 3 generations at any hour for anybody who came. The heat arrived first, thick August air off the marsh. Then the men came in with the stretcher. They did not speak. They did not give her a name or a county form or a hospital tag. They carried the body past the arrangement room like men who had walked that hallway before and laid it on her steel table still wrapped in a shrimp boat tarp that smelled of diesel and iron. One of them set a bundle down beside the drain trough, cash banded tight as thick as the family Bible on the lectern in her chapel. Then all 4 of them stepped back against the tile wall like pallbearers, waiting on a hymn, and Callie understood that she was not alone with them. At the far end of the corridor, where the sconce light gave out, a man was standing without leaning on anything. He was very tall, narrow and raw-boned in a black 3-piece suit, buttoned all the way in Savannah in August, as if the heat had been informed of him and had chosen to go around. Sun freckles across his nose and cheekbones, the kind that come from 20 years of open water. Dark red-brown hair going gray at the temples. Pale gray-green eyes with almost no color in the lashes. On the little finger of his left hand, a woman's mourning ring in black enamel and gold, and the last 3 fingers of that hand curled and would not open. He carried it at his side like a tool he had stopped apologizing for. Callie had lived in this city her whole life. She knew the name before he gave it, the way you know a hurricane by the color of the sky. Silas Thorne, he said. And he said it the way other men say the time. I know who you are. Then we can skip a great deal. He looked past her at the table. You will make this man beautiful, not presentable, beautiful. And in 3 nights there will be a funeral for him, at 11 in the morning, in the open, with the doors of your chapel standing wide, and every soul in this city welcome to walk in off the street and look at his face. I need a certificate of death signed by a physician or the coroner, she said. I need a name. You will have all of it by tomorrow evening. And if I say no, he considered her a moment. He did not look at the money, and he did not look at his men. Then I will have wasted 3 nights, he said, and you will have wasted the rest of them. He turned and walked back to the arch and sat down in the plain wooden chair her grandfather had kept there for widows who could not make it all the way to the office. He sat down like a man who intended to be found there in the morning. Callie's hands were shaking, so she did the only thing she had ever been able to do with shaking hands. She went to work. She peeled the tarp back and folded it. A man of about 30, thin, ash blonde, an old scar through one eyebrow, wearing a Courier Company shirt with the logo torn off. 4 entry wounds. 2 low on the left side, 1 through the shoulder, 1 that had gone in under the collarbone and traveled somewhere she did not like to think about. He had been packed by somebody with a steady hand and no license, and he smelled of gunpowder and river water. She laid the back of her wrist against his sternum, out of habit, the way her father had taught her. Because the dead go cold from the middle outward, and the middle tells you how long you have. He was warm. Callie went absolutely still. She leaned down and put 2 fingers under the angle of his jaw, and held them there while the wall clock counted, and somewhere in the 4th second, she felt it. Slow, impossibly slow, but there. She turned around and Silas Thorne was already in the doorway of her prep room, and he had not made 1 sound crossing 40 feet of heart pine floor. You knew, she said. Yes. He is alive. There is a hospital 9 minutes from this door. There are 3 men sitting in the parking deck of that hospital, and they have been sitting there since Friday, and they are not there for the coffee. If that man's chart is opened anywhere in the state of Georgia, he stops breathing before the ink dries. He came 1 step in. Do you understand what I am telling you, or do you need me to be uglier about it? I understand you want me to commit a felony in my father's building. I want you to keep a man breathing while the world watches him get buried. Everything else is paperwork. She should have run for the front. Instead, she heard herself ask the practical question, the one that came from 20 years in the trade, and she hated how steady it came out. How cold do you want him? Something moved behind his face. Not warmth. Interest the way a man looks at a lock that has just done something unexpected. Cold enough to fool a nurse, he said, not cold enough to kill him. Then he gave her the rules, and they never changed for 3 nights. Nobody but Callie touched the man. The lid of the coffin would not be closed for any reason, at any hour, not for a visitor, not for the police. She would not leave the property. 2 men on the garden wall, 2 on the lane, 1 on the carriage house roof. And Silas Thorne would sit in that wooden chair. She thought it was theater. At 4 in the morning, she came out for a bag of cotton, and he was there, in the dark hands loose on his knees, awake. At 6:30, the light came green through the crepe myrtles, and he had not moved. She worked all that first night and did not sleep. She did everything embalming does, and none of what it is, because you cannot embalm a living man. She cooled him with gel packs until his skin went the right shade of nothing. She set the mouth with a wax former so his jaw would not give him away. She fitted the eye caps under the lids, the little ridged domes that keep a dead man's eyes from sinking, and when the first one seated, his eyeball rolled under her fingertip, and she had to put both hands flat on the table and breathe. She talked to him while she worked. She always talked to them. She told him her name and the name of the room, and that his shirt was ruined and she was sorry about it, and that she was going to move his arm now, and that it might hurt. Around 3, she felt somebody in the doorway and did not turn. "Why do you talk to him?" Silas said. "Because he can hear me. He is unconscious. So were half the people I have had on this table, right up until they were not." She threaded a suture through the collar seam and pulled it flat. "My grandfather said the last sense to leave a house is the hearing." He meant houses. He was talking about people. Silas said nothing so long that she finally looked. He was watching her hands. Not her face, not the man on the table. Her hands moving. When she looked up, he turned his head away. And he turned it faster than a man needs to. Then he said, in exactly the voice he had used about the hospital, "Who else has a key to that back door?" "Nobody. Me. Somebody has oiled the lock on the archive room at the end of this hall, inside the last month. The plate is clean and the hinge pin is bright. Who else has a key?" Callie put down her needle. "My father had a full ring," she said. "It came back to me in a plastic hospital bag with his watch. All of it. I never counted it." "Count it," Silas said, and went back to his chair. She did not count it that night. She stood in the archive room with the light off instead, and she smelled machine oil, and she did not sleep. The certificate arrived the next evening at 6:30, wearing a seersucker jacket and carrying a paper sack of boiled peanuts. "There she is," Warren Ludlow said, and his voice filled the front hall the way it had filled it since she was 6 years old. "There's my girl." He was 63 thick through the middle, white hair combed wet, a face made out of kindness and gin. He was the coroner of this county now, and for 19 years before that he had been her father's deputy, and before that her father's best friend. Since the 2nd grade he had taught Callie to drive, in the hearse, and he had carried her father's casket on the front left corner, and cried so hard that 2 men had to hold his elbows. He set the peanuts down and took her face in both hands and kissed her forehead, and something in her chest came loose that had been tight for 18 hours. "Word is, you got a delivery," he said gently. "Uncle Warren." "No sugar. It's fine." He drew a folder from the jacket, laid it on the blotter, squared the edges with 2 fingers. "Amos Kell, 31 years old, no people, aneurysm in a rented room on the west side. I signed it myself an hour ago. It is clean, it is mine, and it is nobody's business." Callie looked at the certificate. She had watched her father fill out 10,000 of them. The handwriting in the cause of death box was neat and slanted and confident. "You examined him?" she said. "I examined him." "Where?" Warren Ludlow smiled at her, and the smile did not falter by the width of a hair. And that was the moment, though, she would not know it for 2 more days, that the ground opened under Callie Rourke. "Baby," he said, "you have got a thorn sitting in your chapel. Do not spend 1 minute worrying about my paperwork." He put a card down beside the folder and tapped it twice. "Day-night Christmas. If that man so much as raises his voice in your daddy's house, you call me and I will bring the whole sheriff's office down this lane with the lights on." "I hear you. That's my girl." He left. She stood at the window and watched his taillights go up the lane between the oaks, and she pressed her hand flat against the glass because she wanted to run after him and did not know why she did not. Behind her from the arch, Silas said, "How long has he had a key?" Callie turned. "He does not have a key. He came in the front and stopped at the door of your archive room before he called your name. A man who has never been in that room does not stop at that door. He buried my father." "I am aware," Silas said, "of what he did with your father," and he sat back down. She wanted to throw something at him. Instead, she worked until her spine locked and found herself standing in the doorway of her own chapel, watching a man she was supposed to be terrified of. The coffin was on the bier, mahogany half-couch open. Silas had moved his chair so his knees nearly touched the base of it. There were flowers in the room now, white lilies and tuberose, that made the whole house smell like a wedding. And Silas was going along the stands with a small flashlight in his good hand, taking every arrangement apart, lifting the foam, running 2 fingers down inside the throat of each vase, checking every wreath by hand like a man diffusing a garden. When he finished, he came back to the coffin and stood over it, and lifted the cuff of his own sleeve, and wiped a film of pollen off the polished lid. He did it the way you straighten a child's collar. Callie stood in the dark of the doorway, with her arms crossed and her heart going somewhere it had no business going, and thought very clearly, "You are the most frightening man in this state, and you have just dusted a coffin with your suit." The second night they came over the garden wall. It was 3:10. She was turning the man's head and she heard one wet crack from the courtyard, one like a branch going down in a storm, and then shoes running on brick. Silas was in the doorway before the second footfall. He did not shout. He crossed the room in 3 strides, put his hand flat between her shoulder blades, and moved her not gently into the corner behind the steel cabinet, and put his own body across the mouth of it. Callie's face ended up against his chest. She could hear his heart, and it was going slower than hers. And that was the single most terrifying fact of her life to that point. The first man came through the door with a suppressed pistol, and Silas shot him twice. Both hands up, the ruined left one hooked under the good one like a rest. The second man came in low and got as far as the table. What happened next took less time than it takes to say it, and Callie only saw parts. The edge of the steel instrument tray. Silas taking the man by the back of the neck. Silas driving him down onto the tiled lip of the drain trough. Something giving. Then it was quiet, and there was blood on her white tile, and Silas Thorne turned around in the middle of it, and came straight to her, and took her jaw in his good hand and tipped her face up into the light. "Look at me. Are you hit?" "No." "Say it again." "I am not hit." He turned her head slightly, checking her ears. His thumb came away wet, and he looked at it, and looked back at her. And it was her own tears, and something in his face went through a door and shut it again. He had a hole through the outside of his left thigh, and he had not mentioned it. He walked to the chapel with his leg leading prints on the pine floor, took off his suit jacket, and laid it over the open box over the man's chest and face, and stood there with his hand flat on it, while his men dealt with what was on her prep room floor. Callie followed him, shaking so hard she had to hold the door frame. "You are bleeding on my floor," she said. "And if you say one more word to me about paperwork, I swear to God. Sit down before you fall down. Do not tell me what to do in my own house. You are useful to me for another 32 hours, Silas said without turning around. And you cannot be useful on the ground. That is the entire content of my interest. You are a pair of hands. Do not make it more than that in your head, because you will be embarrassed later." It landed exactly where he aimed it. She went white. She stitched his leg anyway, an hour later, on a folding chair in the flower room. He did not make a noise. He watched her hands the whole time, and when she tied off the last suture, he said in a completely different voice, "You did not have to do that." "No," Callie said, "I did not." Then she went and opened her father's ledgers. She had never had a reason to. The front of a funeral home is a story you tell the living, and the back is arithmetic, and her father had always done the arithmetic. The ledgers were beautiful. Green leather, 1 to a year, and inside, in her father's small, hard hand, every service Rourke & Sons had ever provided. Name, date, cause, weight at intake, casket, vault, cemetery, balance. She read for 3 hours, and after she found the second one, she knew what she was looking for, and it went faster. 31 lines with the weight column blank. 31 funerals over 20 years. some of the names she half remembered from the paper. Everyone a closed casket, everyone a graveside service at Cortland Hill, with no viewing, and everyone a vault sealed at the funeral home instead of at the plot, which is not how it is done, and every one of them in the box where the weight of the intake goes nothing at all, because there had been nothing to weigh. Callie sat on the archive room floor with a ledger across her knees and did the arithmetic her father had spent his life doing. And the answer was that her family had buried 31 empty boxes and taken money for it. She came out into the chapel at 5 in the morning with the ledger against her chest, and Silas Thorne looked up and saw what she was carrying and closed his eyes for a second before he opened them again. "Sit down," he said. "No." "Callie, sit down." It was the first time he had used her name. The third night, the storm came in off the ocean and took the power out at 9, and Rourke and Sons went to candles. They had 400 of them in the storeroom. Callie set them out because she did not know what else to do with her hands. Along the chair rails and the sconces up both sides of the aisle. The old room woke up the way it must have looked the year her great-grandfather opened it. Wet gold light, every brass fitting burning rain coming down the tall windows in sheets, the live oaks outside moving like something breathing. The man in the coffin had been getting worse all day. His color kept going and coming back wrong. She had been giving him water on a sponge, and now there was blood in his sputum. She went up to the bier with a candle, set it on the flower stand, and put her palm flat on his chest to count the beat, because she had no stethoscope worth anything and no light to read a watch by. She was counting. She got to 11. And under her hand, the chest took a real breath, deep and ragged, and the man's left eyelid slid up off the eye cap, and a slice of eye looked out at her through it. Callie made a sound she had never made in her life. Behind her, the wooden chair went over backward, and Silas Thorne came up out of it with a pistol already cocked and hanging loose against his thigh, and he stopped 4 feet away, with the whole chapel burning around him, and his face for the first time in 3 days completely open. Not at the man, at her. He was looking at her hand on the chest. "Is he going?" Silas said. "I do not know." "Callie, I do not know. I am an embalmer, not a trauma surgeon. I have kept him breathing for 3 days on a sponge and cold packs, and I am telling you he dies on that pillow if you do not move him." And then she stopped, because Silas had set the pistol down on the flower stand, which was a thing she would have bet her life he would never do in a room with a stranger, and gone down on one knee beside the coffin, and taken the dying man's hand in his ruined one. "Not tonight," he said to him. "Do you hear me? Not tonight." Callie looked at the back of his bent head, and the entire architecture of what she thought she understood came down. "Who is he to you?" she said. Silas did not get up. "Nobody. I have met him 3 times. He was a night clerk in the county coroner's office for 6 years, and he typed what he was told to type, and 11 weeks ago he stopped being able to do it, and he came to me, of all the men in this state, because he had run out of clean ones." "Why does he matter?" "Because he is the last living person," Silas said, "who was inside that building the night your father was shot on those front steps." The rain filled up the silence. "You have had 4 years, Callie said. Her voice came out wrong. 4 years, and you knew there was a witness, and you sat on it. "I have had 11 weeks. And before that, Silas said, "I had 4 years of standing in that lane." He went to the window where the rain was coming down, and put his good hand on the frame, and told her the rest of it in a voice with nothing in it at all, which was how she knew what it cost. 10 years ago, a woman had come into this building at 7 in the morning in the back of a county van, with no name on the tag, and no family listed because the family she had was not allowed to claim her without starting a war. Her son had come in behind the van straight off a shrimp boat in the only jacket he owned, with $11,000 in a paper bag, and he had put the bag on the desk of a 24-year-old girl covering the front while her father was at lunch. And the girl had pushed the bag back across the desk and said, "We do not take money from others." "I did not know your name," Silas said. "For 6 years I did not know your name. I knew there was a girl in that building who put my mother's hair the way she used to wear it and not the way it was in the photograph I gave you, because you looked at that photograph, and you could see it had been taken in a bad year." Callie's hand had come up over her mouth. "You sent me a card," he said. "I send everybody a card." "You wrote it out by hand." He took his wallet from his hip pocket, and out of the fold of it a piece of paper about the size of a stamp, so worn along the creases it had gone soft as cloth, And he did not open it, and he did not give it to her. 4 years ago, your father took 4 rounds on the front steps of this house, and this business had 18 months of debt against it, and no other Rourke in it. It was going to be a parking lot by Christmas. He put the paper back. There is a company in Atlanta that has bought the paper on this building 3 times, and there is a man who has sat in a car at the top of that lane on Tuesday and Thursday nights for 4 years, because Tuesday and Thursday are the nights you close alone. Callie's ears were roaring. You have been watching me. Yes. For 4 years. Yes. Why? Silas turned around from the window, and the candles were behind him now, and she could not see his face. Because the last order I refused, he said, was for you. And the man in the coffin said in a voice like a hinge, Ludlow. They both turned. His eye was open, the one that would open. His mouth moved twice before anything came out of it. Callie got to him first and got a hand behind his head. Easy. You are all right. You are in a funeral home, that is all. Ludlow, he said again, and then do not let him sign it. Sign what? Kell. The clerk's face came apart. Amos Kell. That is not a man. That is the name we use. There is no Amos Kell. There never was. It is the name that goes on the ones that are not. Callie's hand was flat on his sternum, and she could feel his heart going and going. That is the name that went on the empty ones, she said. 31, he said. In the book, he signed 31. Warren Ludlow signed them. And the clerk looked at her out of his one open eye, with a kind of pity she would remember on her deathbed, and said, No, ma'am. Mr. Ludlow was the deputy. The deputy does not sign. The room tilted. Desmond Rourke signed them, the clerk said. Every one. I typed them. I have typed his name and his stamp 31 times, and I never met the man, but I know his hand better than my own mother's. Callie let go of him. She turned around very slowly, and Silas Thorne was standing perfectly still by the window, and he was not surprised, not by any part of it. He had not moved a muscle. You knew, she said. Yes. For how long? 11 weeks. You have been sitting in a chair in my chapel for 3 nights, and you let me hunt through those ledgers on my hands and knees, and you knew. Yes. Why? Because you had a father, Silas said. And I have been in the other room, and I know exactly what it is worth to have one. And I was going to let you keep him for as long as I could. Callie hit him. She did it with an open hand and put her whole shoulder in it, and it turned his head, and 400 candles went sideways in her eyes, and he took it without lifting either hand, and when he turned his face back to her, there was nothing in it but permission to do it again. Get out, she said. Get out of my father's house. There are 4 men on that wall, and I am not moving them. Then get out of this room. He did. She watched him from the upstairs window at 2 in the morning. He did not go to a car. He walked out to the middle of the lane in the rain between the 2 big oaks and shirt sleeves, with a hole stitched shut in his leg, and stood there facing the house. At 3 he was there. At 4 he was there. At 5:30, when the sky over the marsh went the color of a bruise, Callie came down onto the porch with her arms wrapped around herself and sat across 40 feet of wet gravel, the only thing she had left. Tell me how to bury him. The funeral of Amos Kell was held at 11 in the morning on a Thursday in the open in front of the entire city, exactly as Silas Thorne had ordered it, and it was the most beautiful work Callie Rourke ever did. She had a man who had been shot 4 times and had not eaten in 5 days, and she made him into a corpse. She kept him cold to the last possible minute. She put the color on in the paste that goes under, not over, so it would not lift in the heat. And she did the one thing her grandfather taught her that nobody teaches anymore, which is that a body reads as dead from the eyebrows and the corners of the mouth and nowhere else. And she spent 40 minutes on 4 square inches of a living man's face. The chapel doors stood open on the lane. 200 people came, half of them for the reason Silas wanted, which was to see with their own eyes and go tell somebody. Callie stood at the back in her black suit and watched the city file past, a man who was breathing 11 times a minute in front of them. Warren Ludlow came in the 2nd row with his hat against his chest and his eyes wet, and at 11:40 they closed the lid. That was the part she had argued about until 3 in the morning, and the part she lost. The lid had to close and the box had to go into the ground in front of witnesses, or none of it was worth anything. She had 4 minutes. After that, the cemetery would be sealed by Silas's own men, and the box would come back up out of the earth before the flowers were laid. They carried him out under the live oaks, with the Spanish moss hanging dead still in the heat, and the cicadas going like a saw. They set him on the straps. The minister spoke. Callie stood on the far side of the open grave with her hands folded, and watched the lid and counted. At 110 seconds, the first round came out of the tree line, and went through the throat of the man standing at Warren Ludlow's left. After that, it was noise. Callie went down. She went down because a hand took her by the back of the belt and put her down, and then all of Silas Thorne came down on top of her and rolled her into the lee of the mounded dirt, and he covered her head with his forearm and pressed his ruined hand flat over her ear, the bad hand, the one that would not open, so she would not lose her hearing when he fired. Rounds went into the dirt beside her face. The straps let go, and the coffin dropped 4 feet into the grave and hit hard, and Callie screamed into his shirt because there was a living man in that box. She heard him say into her hair with no fear in it at all, "I have got you. I have got you." And she understood, lying in the dirt with the white sky above her, that the second worst thing about that morning was that some part of her had never in her life been so safe. The shooting lasted 19 seconds. Silas had men in the tree line since dawn, and by the time Callie got her head up, it was already over. She went in after the box. She got down on the lid in her funeral suit and her fingers under the rim, and the seal was jammed from the drop, and she was screaming for a bar, and it was Silas who came into the hole with a grave spike and put it in the crack and leaned on it with his whole body. The lid came up. The clerk's eyes were open, and he was breathing, and there was blood at the corner of his mouth where he had bitten through his lip, not making a sound for 4 minutes and 11 seconds. Callie sat down in the dirt at the bottom of her own family's cemetery and laughed until she cried. When she walked back into Rourke & Sons at 3:30 that afternoon, with grave dirt on her knees, Warren Ludlow was sitting in her father's office, in her father's chair, with her father's ledger open on the desk in front of him. Percy Gadsden was standing behind him. Percy had driven the hearse for this family for 41 years, and had given her butterscotch out of his shirt pocket when she was 4 years old. He was 70 now, his hands were shaking, he would not look at her, and there was a gun in Warren Ludlow's lap. "Sit down, sugar," Warren said kindly. She sat down. "Percy called you," she said. "Percy has called me every night for 4 years. Do not be hard on him. He is looking after you. He has been looking after you the whole time, same as me." He turned the ledger around on the desk with 2 fingers, the way he had turned that certificate on the blotter. "Your daddy was the best man I ever knew. I want you to hear that from me before you hear anything else, because there is not a soul left alive who can say it with any authority except me." He tapped the page. 19 years he was coroner of this county, and 19 years I was his deputy, and one time a fella came to him with a problem. Woman had testified and was going to get killed for it, and there is no witness program worth a damn in a county this size. So Desmond made her dead, buried an empty box in front of her whole family, and put her on a bus to Amarillo, and she died in her own bed at 81. 31, Callie said. 31, Warren agreed. "And I would like you to sit there and tell me which of them we should have left to get shot." "You sold them." Warren's face did not change. "Some of them paid." "You sold the machine," Callie said. "You had a coroner in your pocket who could make any human being in this county officially not exist, and you rented him out. And when the buyers stopped being runaway witnesses, my father figured it out, and he stopped." "He stopped," Warren said. "And you shot him on his own steps." "I did not shoot anybody," Warren said, and he said it with real hurt. And that was the worst part of all. Callie, sugar, he would not sign the last one, and there were people who needed it signed, and I begged that man on my knees, in this room, in the chair you are sitting in, and he looked at me and said, "Warren, not this one." Something cold went through her. "Whose name was on the last one?" Warren Ludlow looked at her a long moment with wet eyes and enormous tenderness. "Yours," he said. The room did not tilt this time. It went very quiet, and very clear the way it does on the table when the noise stops, and there is only the next correct movement. "He would not make me disappear," Callie said. "He would not put you on a bus. That is all it ever was, baby. A bus and a new name and a life. And he could not stand to lose you. It got him killed. And it left you standing in the middle of this thing with your daddy's stamp in your desk drawer and no idea what you were sitting on." He leaned forward. "And now there is a thorn in your chapel and a clerk who is supposed to be in the ground, and honey, there is nowhere left to put you but on a bus." He stood up with the gun. Callie stood up too and put her hand flat on the desk and said the thing her father had said to Warren Ludlow in this room 4 years ago, and it was not a plea. "Give me his pen." Warren blinked. "What? If I am signing my own certificate, I am not doing it with a county ballpoint. His pen is in the top left drawer. Give it to me and say the name out loud like you did for him, and I will sign it and you can put me on your bus." And Warren Ludlow, who had loved her since she was born, and who had never in his life been able to resist doing a thing with ceremony, opened the drawer and put her father's pen in her hand and said, "Callista Ann Rourke." Under the desk on the shelf where it had sat for 40 years because her father dictated his case notes into it, the old cassette recorder ran. Percy Gadsden looked at that desk. Then he looked at the girl he had given butterscotch to, and Percy shoved the chair. Warren shot him through the stomach, and the office door came off its top hinge, and Silas Thorne came through it. He had a pistol in his good hand, and he did not use it because Callie was in the line. He took Warren Ludlow across the room and into the wall of her father's bookcase, hard enough to bring 3 shelves down on both of them. Callie got the recorder off the shelf and held it against her chest with both arms like a child holding a doll, and watched a man who had come to her house for Thanksgiving for 34 years get taken apart on the floor. Silas got his ruined hand into Warren's collar and lifted him and put the muzzle under his chin. "No," Callie said. Silas did not look at her. "Go out of the room." "No." She came around the desk with the recorder in her hands. "He signs first." Warren Ludlow sat at Desmond Rourke's desk for 2 hours that afternoon with a broken cheekbone and a pistol lying on the blotter that nobody was holding, and wrote out all 31 names in his own hand, and beside each one the year the buyer and where the person had gone, if they had gone anywhere at all. 9 of them had not, and Callie wrote those 9 names on a separate page and folded it into her jacket. At the end of it, Warren put down the pen and looked up and said, "Your daddy loved you more than God." "I know," Callie said. "That is the part I have to live with." They took him out at dusk. The car went up the lane between the oaks with no lights on, and Callie stood on the porch and did not ask then or ever where it went. She only knew that at Cortland Hill there was a grave dug that morning for a man named Amos Kell, and that graves like that do not stay open in this county for long. Percy Gadsden lived and came back to work because she let him. The clerk got a name Callie was never told, and a town she was never told, and the last thing he said to her was, "Thank you for talking to me, ma'am. I could hear you the whole time." And in October, when the heat finally broke, Callie Rourke filed 106 pages with the state of Georgia. And the story ran on the front page for 9 days, and 31 families learned what was and was not in the ground they had been visiting. She reopened every one of those graves herself, and stood at every one of them in her black suit, and answered every question anybody asked, including the ones about her father, and she answered those with the truth out loud, in front of people who had trusted the Rourke name for 3 generations. It cost her the business and nearly the license. Her grandfather's name came off the front of the building for 11 months while the board argued about it. And through all of it, not once in the newspapers or the hearings or the transcripts did the name Thorne appear. Because a week after the ledgers went to the state, Silas Thorne walked into a room on the water, in front of the 4 men who had been buying names out of Warren Ludlow's office for 20 years, put the second copy of that tape on the table, and took all 31 erasures onto his own house. He gave up the shipping lanes his father had died over, and he walked out of that room owning almost nothing except a promise extracted at a price she never learned, that no hand in this state would ever again be laid on a woman named Rourke. She learned it in pieces over a year from people who did not know they were telling her. She did not see him. He did not come to the hearings. He did not come to the reburials. There was no car at the top of the lane on Tuesdays and Thursdays anymore, and she found to her fury that she noticed. He came the following August on the anniversary when she was at Cortland Hill, setting a new marker on her father's grave. She had had it cut with his name and the dates, and under them one line she wrote herself and made the stonecutter carve exactly as she gave it to him. He signed 31 and refused the last. She heard the grass behind her and did not turn around. "That is a hard stone," Silas said. "It is an honest one." He came and stood beside her. The moss hung down and the cicadas went, and he was thinner, and there was more gray in him, and he was wearing, for the first time since she had known him, no jacket at all. "I am told the board gave you the license back." "They gave it back in June. And the sign, it goes up Friday." She looked at him then. "It says Rourke, just Rourke. There are no sons." Something happened at the corner of his mouth that on any other man would have been a smile. They stood there a while. A heron went over. Then Callie said, "You never opened it." "No. 10 years and you never opened it." "I know what it says." She put her hand out, palm up between them. "I want it back." Silas Thorne looked at her hand a long moment, and Callie watched the most dangerous man in the state of Georgia work out that he was going to lose and find himself unable to mind. "No," he said. "Then you do not get to stand in the lane anymore." Her voice was not steady, and she let it not be steady. "You do not get to buy the paper on my building, and you do not get to sit in a car at the top of my road on the nights I close alone. If you want to be in my life, you come in the front door at a decent hour like a man, and you take the chair in the chapel and you stay the whole 3 nights." The wind came up off the marsh and moved the moss. He took her hand, the whole hand in his ruined one, and closed the 3 curled fingers over it as best they would go, which was not very well, and held on anyway. "I have never been good at leaving," he said. They buried nobody that day. They walked back through the oaks toward the gate, and behind them the new stones stood up straight and told the truth to anybody who came. And ahead of them, the lights of a house that had stood on that lane for 130 years were coming on, one at a time, in the dark. And at 2 in the morning, the back bell rang. If this one held you all the way to the end, stay with me, because the next story starts the same way, with a door that should never have been opened. Tell me in the comments which moment you would not have survived, and if you would sit 3 nights beside a coffin for somebody, say so.